A lot of indie games like to emulate or get inspiration from games from the retro or classic age, but with a sort of twist. We're diving into one such game that aimed to emulate the Mega Man series, specifically Mega Man X and Mega Man Zero, combining it with the run system, upgrades, and randomness of the roguelike genre. With the sequel, 30XX, coming to the Switch in about a month and a half, I thought it was time to dive into the original game that's been on the hybrid console for quite some time. Here is my review of 20XX for the Nintendo Switch. When it comes to story, it's very brief and not really shown that much in game. We get an intro scene of robots running amok and an armored boy and girl that definitely don't look like Mega Man X and Zero being hired by some scientists and sent to clean up the mess. That's pretty much all we get story-wise. There are some really crazy and out there implications that you see during the final boss and epilogue, but nothing stated outright. It's really just, hey, there was a robot uprising, armored girl and boy, go out and stop it. When it comes to gameplay, this is a 2D side-scrolling roguelite. As you play, you'll be navigating 2D stages, fighting off enemies and bosses, and acquiring abilities as you move throughout the different stages. Now, this is a roguelite, not to be confused with a roguelike. This is a genre of games where you do what is called a run, tackling the game in one shot, where death means you start over from the beginning. Think The Binding of Isaac, but Mega Man. And the light in the genre means that this game lets you carry over parts of progression from run to run, not making you completely start without any powers on your next time through. And that's where progression comes in. You start at a hub where you can swap between the playable characters Nina and Ace, with Nina being a very clear copy of Mega Man X and Ace that of Mega Man Zero. There are different ways to play, with just starting a run or heading in with different upgrades and abilities to help you start. Now at the beginning you'll have nothing, but as you complete or fail at runs, you can buy and unlock upgrades, be it permanent upgrades that will drop at the beginning of each run, unlocking different items to be in the pool of things you can get in each run, or something to take with you on your next time through. Once you get in, it's like a normal Mega Man game. You tackle 8 stages that each end in a boss fight, you get the boss's power upon their defeat, and move on to another stage of your choosing. All the bosses have weaknesses, so you can bring previous boss powers to later ones to exploit them. And these stages have a lot of new and old in terms of what it's emulating. There's a lot of Mega Man X here, from wall sliding and charge shots to the simple animations of dash jumps and mid-air transitions into boss rooms. How you fight is also incredibly similar. Nina plays very much like Mega Man X with the little pea shooter bullets that can charge into a much larger blast, and Ace is the same with his classic triple slash with his saber that is reminiscent of Mega Man Zero. But the randomness and rogue aspect really make this different. This game has a ton of upgrades and abilities you find as you play, from boxes, special challenge rooms, and boss fights themselves. After all, you can actually choose when you complete a stage whether you want to take the boss power with you or get a different upgrade that is chosen at random. Now, these range from increasing your max health and energy to actually changing what your primary weapon does, like Nina's regular pea shooter turning into a triple shot with angles or 4-way shot that goes up, down, behind, and in front. We also have a lot of body armor upgrades similar to light capsules that grant more useful things like immunity to knockback, mid-air dashing, and aerial hovering for a couple seconds. The latter is just like X's hover boots upgrade from Mega Man X4. I especially love using it with Ace's spear weapon because those spinning slashes in the air while you're hovering are really useful. But that's not all that's random. The levels are as well. This is what is called procedural generated level design. Essentially, the level is generated from a bunch of different pre-selected pieces of the level as far as like the platforming, traps, and enemy placement. You will eventually start to recognize some of the layout pieces, but it's very random and works well at making each trek through a stage different than the last. Your goal here is to make it through all 8 bosses in the final stages without dying. Not once. And the game does everything it can to make that difficult. The platforming actually gets a lot harder depending on how far you are in a run, changing a stage from easy platforming to an intricate jumping nightmare. Even the bosses change depending on where you are in the game. Some of them have second phases and extra attacks you only see in the late game. It gets a little crazy, so you're going to want to learn which ones are a pain in the butt later on and make sure you tackle them as early as possible. But let's be honest, you will be dying and you will die a lot. The goal of the runs are to learn patterns, how to adjust to the randomness of stages, and more importantly, getting upgrades that go beyond your first run. When you die in the game, you go back to the hub with all of the soul gems you acquire from bosses and special flashing enemies during the stages. Depending on how far you go, you'll have enough to afford a lot of these, though permanent upgrades are what you're going to want to grab sooner rather than later. These will give you permanent bonuses on all future runs, especially the ones that make weapon and armor upgrades drop at the beginning of the first stage. And that's the gameplay loop. You do runs to learn, fail, spin on upgrades, try again with those upgrades, fail again, and keep throwing yourself at that wall until you tackle all 10 bosses and manage to beat the game. It's an adventure of constant progression and learning, and it works out pretty well considering the formula that it uses. I found a lot of fun in getting a little further with each run, inching my way towards that final stage. And this game's final boss is a really creative way to use the rogue elements for a memorable final fight. But if I had to point out a flaw, it's that the randomness can sometimes be a detriment. Some runs are simply built against you. If you don't get the right upgrades or certain bosses don't show up in the boss select early enough to fight their easier forms, you can get to a point where it is virtually impossible to actually complete the game. This is especially true for runs that don't offer you the hover boots or air dash to help with mobility for those final 2 stages. I personally think those are absolutely required for the borderline NES level of platforming those 2 stages can make. Now, as far as content and length goes, my first successful run took me a little over an hour, but that was after unlocking all of the permanent upgrades, doing nearly a dozen different runs, and roughly 10 hours overall from first starting. After you do clear it the first time, you unlock 2 extra playable characters that were DLC in the PC version, one of which uses a special whip that absorbs energy for easier power usage, and another that can gain the abilities of the other characters as they progress. You've also got access to endless mode, daily and weekly challenges, and working to unlock every possible item and going through with different builds, eventually being able to customize what items do and don't appear in your runs. Next, let's talk about presentation. Despite fan backlash leading to the art design of the sequel being completely different, I think this game looks beautiful. It's very colorful and there's a ton going on with the environments as well as the character models. It all looks pretty much flawless, even in handheld mode. We also get a great 60 frames per second for almost the entire game. The only times I ever saw it drop below 60 were in handheld mode when picking up powered up drops after defeating a boss, only for a second or two. And that brings us to battery life. 20XX gives the original and light models a battery range of about 2.5 to 3 hours, and the V2 and OLED models get 5 to 6 hours. In conclusion, 20XX brings Mega Man X-like gameplay mixed with random everything for a pretty interesting little roguelite that starts off easy and can sometimes turn into NES level platforming. Now on the downside, the RNG can sometimes block you from realistically beating a run, but with constant upgrades you can carry over, smooth gameplay, and each run giving you different sets of abilities to use, it can be fun, even for those that already have the proper Mega Man collections on their Switch. Reviews to Go rates 20XX for the Nintendo Switch a 9 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.